We're here in the Teachers Club in Dublin with Diarmuid Breatnach. Could you tell me how you got involved in politics?
Well, the first thing that I actually, my father was quite politically active and my mother was quite politically aware, but I never really got active here in Ireland. I first became active in England. I went to England very young. I was 18 years old, and no, actually 17 years old. I hadn't yet reached 18, and I was kind of impressed by the state of the English working class and their conditions, because we'd always been given the impression here in Ireland at the time that we were poor but England was well off. So I was really shocked to see some of those conditions, and I was starting manual work and being interested in trade unions for the first time, but I didn't really become active until quite late, when a friend of mine came over, and a friend of mine had contact here with the Internationalists. The Internationalists were a Marxist-Leninist group here, and they went on to become a small communist party in England. And we were interested in them because I was interested in what he had to say about them, and we were sharing a room together. So from that I went on a demonstration when Smith declared UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. And it wasn't that we were against independence for Rhodesia, but we knew that this was independence for the white ruling class, the white colonial ruling class, and that the reason he was declaring independence was because he was under pressure to ameliorate the conditions and introduce more democracy, because they, I presume, because they feared revolution there. So there was a demonstration against Rhodesia House in the Strand, and when I got there I saw that the police were 3 lines deep in front of it, and there was no way to get through to it. And then somebody said, South Africa House is just down the road and there's only 1 policeman in front of it. So a whole shift came and a whole load of the crowd moved right down into Trafalgar Square. It was right in front of it. And this one policeman was trying to defend the South Africa House against these people. And then of course the police swamped the area and they started doing random arrests, and I got arrested among them. I could just see the police saying that one, that one, that one, the police chief, and the constable was going forward and grabbing people and arresting them. So I ended up in a police station that night, and some statements were taken and stuff. And next morning into court, and I happened to get a witness, and the case was put off for a little while, and then I came up for the court case, and I can't remember why, but I got delayed. I was in South London and I ended up arriving late, and my witness was fuming, and she was saying that she wasn't going to stay any longer, and off she went. And I went into magistrates' court. Now, there was a left-wing trade union, left-wing legal team at the time which covered a lot of these arrests, and the firm that seemed to be doing most of the work was Bernberg, which is, I presume, Jewish, of Jewish extraction. And I remember that they were still going years later doing left-wing cases as well. So there were a whole load of people going up, and just before me, while I was sitting in the court, I saw a Latin American guy go up and give his evidence, and a similar thing. Police said that he jumped forward and assaulted them, which is what they were going to say about me. And I'll never forget this, the magistrate said, well, Mr. Perez, when you were giving your evidence, I saw a gleam of anger come into your eyes, and we all know about Latin American temperaments, and that he was found guilty. And I thought, I have no chance here, no chance. So when it came up to my turn, which was the next one, the prosecution laid the case out against me that I had jumped forward and attacked this policeman, which wasn't true. And the policeman gave evidence and said that I had injured my hand in attacking him. Now, I'd actually complained to him about how he was manhandling me because I had some injuries to my hand from when I was working in a dry cleaning place. Some of the liquid had kind of burnt the skin a bit, and he was using that. So I always remember, never say anything to them, go whatever you say, they're going to use it. And the prosecution lawyer brought forward this photograph of the demonstration, and in that demonstration there was a person who could have been me because he had a beard and he had glasses, which I had at the time, but part of his face was covered, something like this, so you couldn't see exactly the whole features. And he said, "Is that you?" And I said, "No, it's not." And he said, "How do you know?" I said, "Well, from the photograph I can see that it's on the wrong end of the square, and on the other hand he's wearing glasses and I wasn't wearing glasses." Now there was no reason why the prosecution guy was doing this, except he just wanted to be clever, I think. So then he went on to call back the police, the constable who had given evidence against me, lying evidence. And he had been sitting in the court, and he'd seen the lawyer try to present myself as having wearing glasses at the time. So being an obedient police officer, he asserted that I had been wearing glasses at the time. And this was a great opportunity for my lawyer, because then he just asked for the list of possessions taken off me, and the glasses weren't there. So it was clear now his evidence was discredited. But did the magistrate say to the police officer that he'd been lying? No, he just said that there was obviously an error of identification here. So I walked out. That was my first case. But it wasn't actually, now that I remember, the first demonstration I got involved in was a little before that, the last of the big Vietnam demonstrations in Grosvenor Square. The famous one with Tariq Ali, because he, in a newspaper which we were buying at the time called Black Dwarf, which was, I think, International Marxist group, I think, or certainly he became that later.
Yeah.
They were really bigging it up, saying it was going to be a revolution in London. And the police apparently took their propaganda seriously and drafted in huge numbers of police. And then that frightened the Tariq Ali and that, and they decided no, they were going to deliver a letter to 10 Downing Street instead. So something like, I don't know, huge numbers went on that, but there were still very large numbers going to Grosvenor Square who decided to go there. And I and my friend who was staying with me at the time, who had brought this political awareness to me in a way, or cheated me up into it, we went on the demonstration. We found the police that surrounded the square, but there were side streets that you could go through and come out into a different part, and we came out between two lines of police, and we were just standing there wondering what to do when we heard the march come. It was like a roar in the distance, and it was great to see them coming. And then people on our side said link arms, and I did, because that's what people were telling me to do. And we charged the police line between us and the coming demonstration, and they charged from the other side. So we caught the police like in a sandwich and burst through. And I remember one police officer going down and some people kicking him, which became a big photograph in the Sun newspaper the next day. And or maybe that was probably Saturday, so it was probably Monday when it got into papers. And I tried to stop him. I thought this was horrible, this man being kicked while he was on the ground. I don't know if I'd have the same response now, but and then we charged again in the other line, and we got through until we were nearer, and then we were in a really deep line of police in front. And at one point, because we were insulting them, what they were doing, you know, one of them grabbed me and threw me behind the line, and I got a kicking in there and then out again. It was just like a few minutes, just kind of a lesson. But one of the interesting things I remember about that is that at one point I was haranguing someone who was, I forget what, I think he was telling us all to go home or something like that. One of our own people apparently. And I started getting kicked in the back of my legs. And I looked around and I couldn't see anybody. And later on I heard that the National Front, which was just starting then, had been picking up some stragglers and beating them up. So that was my first awareness of, not of racism certainly,
The far right.
but of the far right mobilising. Yeah. I think from 1968, involved in a big squatting campaign in Ilford, East London. This was not as people imagine squatting to be now, I think, but it was a case of taking over empty houses and putting families into them, and then being there as guards and helping them. So I came under the influence of, I'd been previously under the influence of Marxism-Leninism, and I came under the influence of anarchism. They were quite, mostly anarchists were leading that, or libertarians. And from there we would go on demonstrations as well, and Ireland, Solidarity with Ireland demonstrations were quite big at the time, along with others like Vietnam and Palestine and so on. So it'd be like an outing for us, if you like.
This is the time when you had the Irish Workers' Group, Jerry Lawless and people like that.
Yes, and I didn't really know them. I knew a guy called, I'd heard of a guy called Diarmuid, who I think was also of Irish background, who was I think he was in the Irish thing, and he was also on the Solidarity thing with Vietnam. But I didn't know any of them. So I knew some Irish people who were in the squatting campaign. There was quite a high proportion of them actually, including some of the families who were being resettled.
And at that time, did you go to visit Butch Roach, who was jailed for maybe a year and a half for throwing CS gas?
I can't remember how I got to know him. I just knew, I think I just heard that there had been, he had, in order to show the MPs what was happening to the people in Derry and Belfast, he'd thrown a CS gas canister into the assembly, and he was in jail on bail when I went to visit him. I think I'd already been in jail myself, perhaps in Ashford, for a week or something like that, because it was quite common for the prosecution to say these people have no fixed address, you need to hold on to them. And it was a way of ensuring you got some prison time even before you went to trial, when you would probably be found guilty. So I just went to visit him. I suppose visits were being organised for him by anarchists, and I went to visit him, and that's my only recollection of that. I think I caught up with him some long time later, and he died young from what I hear.
Yeah, I think he died in his 40s.
Yeah.
What about that time? Could you tell me something about the Irish that were active politically, let's say 1960s, 70s, people that were sort of, they wouldn't be heard of now?
Yeah,
if you can remember any.
I mentioned the Boran, and you've mentioned one, but they were just kind of names that I would have heard. On the ground level, people were active, not necessarily representing any organisation. For instance, there were two guys from my hometown, believe it or not, in this Ilford squatting campaign for a while. There was a guy from, there were two Irish guys, one from Dublin and one from Belfast, who had their families squatting. But on a more organised level, what I remember most was Sinn Féin. And that was coming up to the time of the Sinn Féin split. And I remember that you would go to one of the rallies and marches, say in Hyde Park, starting in Hyde Park Corner, and there seemed to be very little politics put forward by whoever was speaking, and he would be asking for money, and it'd be something like, and there's £5 from Clare, oh, and £10 from Limerick, and I thought, this is terrible. This is just some kind of lottery or money collection. It's got nothing to do with that. And I also remember that there was a showing of Misha Era, which was organised by the Connolly Association, and went to see that with my mate. That was in Lewisham, Lewisham Town Hall, I think, actually, which later on I would become very acquainted with, because I lived in Lewisham and organised in Lewisham for a long time. But at the time, it was I didn't know it at all. It looked totally strange to me, even though I was in New Cross, which wasn't very far away. But after I'd seen the film, which I'd seen once before, we'd been taken to it from our school, Scoil Orcán, which is an Irish language school, when I was in primary. The guy from the Connie Association stood up and said, well, that's kind of what we're after. And I thought, this is, again, no politics, you know, no explanation of what this is, what we're after. It finished kind of like with the Free State being set up. And I thought, you can't be for that. So when they put the hat around, for one of the few times in my life, I refused to put any money in. That's my recollection of those early days. I was also mixing quite a lot with the Afro-Caribbean community, a lot of them lived in the street where I was, and my landlady was Afro-Caribbean. But we wouldn't have socialised in the same places. They had their own particular societies. For instance, they would meet in somebody's house. Would give a room taken over to, and they'd call it a club. This is the Afro-Caribbeans, mostly Jamaicans, I think. And you'd buy you'd buy a can of Long Life or Guinness for 2 and 6, and you'd buy a goat curry for 2 and 6. And there'd be music playing. You'd have ska and blue beat and stuff like that being played. But the Irish would be congregating in the pub. Now, some of the Afro-Caribbeans had pubs as well, and they played dominoes in them. And you can hear them playing dominoes from about a mile away. They slam the tiles down on the table when they're playing. But they wouldn't have socialised together. They wouldn't have been hostile together, and they would have worked in the same places together. Like, I worked in a foundry as a labourer, and I was the only white labourer there, and I was Irish.
Is that how you got involved with anti-fascist action and stuff like anti-racism? Because you were involved with sort of other ethnic people in Britain?
Well, I come from a multi-ethnic family myself. My mother's half Basque, half German. My father was Irish. Yeah. And we were always brought up to be anti-racist, always. We hadn't seen many black people in Dublin, but we knew about it elsewhere. And in fact, at one point, I had been going to go to a rugby game to protest about the All Blacks coming to play in, which is a bit of an ironic name for them, coming to play in Ireland, because they were a segregated team. They didn't have any black people in it. And the anti-apartheid movement was protesting against it here, or at least some people were protesting. I don't know if the anti-apartheid movement existed formally at the time, but I spent ages getting a placard together, and in the end I just felt so embarrassed about walking out with it. It never occurred to me I could put it in a bin liner. I really probably didn't even have bin liners at the time. I'll cover it up in some way and get on the bus, so I never went. So I was always anti-racist, anti-fascist, and I suppose my knowledge and contacts with the Afro-Caribbean community and later others helped me to give expression to that. But it wasn't the contact with the Afro-Caribbeans that made me anti-racist. I was already anti-racist. Okay.
And I know I'm going to jump forward a good bit, but could you tell me about your involvement in the Irish hunger strikes and solidarity actions around about 1981?
1974, just to take it back a little bit further, the Prevention of Terrorism Act had been passed, and should have been called the Terrorise the Irish Act, because that's what it did. 20 people were taken out of our community in different trials and prosecuted for murders in actions they hadn't committed. They were framed, and if the death penalty had still been there, they would have hung. The Irish community was quite intimidated, plus the fact that a lot of us didn't actually agree with bombing in London. We didn't see the point of that. You know, that was attacking, for the most part, ordinary people, and ordinary people would be affected by it. But it did terrorise the Irish community, and Irish solidarity activity really took a drop, and the number of people involved really took a drop. But the hunger strikes really brought it out again. It was just horrible to watch.
And it was very brave to come out at that time, because it had been so repressive for like a decade. in Britain?
Yes, but at the same time, it just felt we had to, you know. Well, I never stopped being active, but I suppose I became more active, and a lot of people did as well. There was a huge demonstration that went up to Tony Benn's house. It just seemed to wander for miles through parts of London. It was absolutely huge, and it was a really hot day. I remember that. I had my daughter with me, who was very small at the time, and I managed to get her a lift on. Well, I was taking her in a pushchair, but I managed to get her a lift on one of the lorries that were accompanying the march. I don't remember much more about that, except that huge march, except that we were doing all these pickets and marches, and then they died.
I know in the beginning of the hunger strikes, the people had a protest in Kilburn, and they sat down. I can remember they nearly all got arrested. Like the police got stuck into them, and you could see them on the news being dragged away.
Yeah, well, you see, we had been so beaten down, the police probably felt they could do that, and that would be the end of it, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't actually remember that particular incident, though many times, I have to tell you, I marched through Kilburn, many times. I remember when Michael Gahan died. I remember the funeral procession down from, I can't remember the name of the pub now, a little bit just beyond Kilburn, and down through Kilburn High Street itself. All the shops were shut, all the pubs were shut. It was quite impressive. That was, I can't remember what year that was.
I think 74.
So, a long time afterwards, I would be doing political work along there. I'd be trying to sell a paper, earlier selling a paper, the Marxist-Leninist group connected with the Internationalists in Ireland then had a paper called Red Patriot.
No, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember at the time, coming up to the Prevention of Terrorism Act, that I had a list of houses that had been visited and had given positive responses to call back to again. And I called to one of those, and it was a guy who worked on the building sites, and he said, no, he said, I'm not having anything to do with any of that anymore. He said, it's just too dangerous now. So that showed me how that whole emphasis had dropped. And I have to say as well that sections of the left were not very supportive of the Irish struggle at the time. They didn't really fight the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and we were telling them at the time that if they didn't, it would come back on them at some point. And the Terrorism Act now that the British state has is much more comprehensive and much wider, because they practically got away with it. It never was repealed. I have to tell you, you know, the whole atmosphere was pretty intimidating at the time. There'd been the Sinn Féin guy who'd been most progressive that I had seen, and had actually talked for the first time I'd ever heard in Hyde Park about linking the struggles of the Irish with the struggles of the working class in England. He was found dead under his tipper truck.
Yeah, in strange circumstances,
yeah,
that's right.
No witnesses apparently. And he wasn't the only one to die around that time. One of our Marxist-Leninists was hit and run, Cornelius Cardew, who was a quite avant-garde musician and quite high regarded in those circles. And there were others I heard. I think if you told me about one at some time, or somebody has, who was found under a bridge in a canal or something like that.
That's right, there was a few, yeah.
Yeah. And then there'd been an anti-fascist killed at Red Lion Square with a demonstration I was at. Actually a guy of Irish descent as well, from Leeds.
Was it Gately, was that his name?
Kevin Gately, yeah. I wrote a little song about him at the time. But you get hit by a baton from high up on a horse. It's got some weight coming down on it, and there were longer batons as well they had. And so I have to tell you, without any sense of dramatisation, just to express how it could have felt at the time, I did not expect to live to see 40.
Yeah.
And I'm quite surprised to be where I am now, at the age I am now. and still active, of course. But I expected that I would be killed, and I thought it very important to teach my daughter to defend herself and to physically fight back, because I might not be around to help later on.
Or you could have been, like a lot of people, framed. Many people were just put away.
Yes, and that's an amazing thing to me is that I never ended up under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. I never ended up in that the Lubyanka of the Irish community up in can't remember the name of the famous police station, which is now occupied, by the way.
Is it Paddington?
Paddington Green,
yeah,
which is occupied now, is under occupation now apparently. I never by some protesting group. I never expected, I always expected to end up there, and I didn't. And I saw people around me being arrested. In the street next to me where I was living with my wife and child at the time, I heard that the police had arrived and arrested somebody, and I sent somebody to find them and just to offer them solidarity, and the woman just didn't want anything to know, and they just moved out afterwards. And that's what would happen. Because you had a visit like that from the police, the impression would go around the area that you were a bomber and you were bombing people and putting them in danger. I remember another time I went to a trade union meeting that for some reason didn't take place. I was newly in the trade union movement then, still working in a foundry. Excuse me. And I went across the road to a pub in New Cross. It was an Irish pub. And Spartacus was shown on the film, on the screen. I love that film. The actor, Kirk Douglas, died just recently.
At 103, I think.
Yes, amazing. And I've read the book since, and the great scene about I Am Spartacus is not in it. So it's one of the few examples maybe where parts of the film are better than the book, although the book has other parts. But anyway, we're watching it, and a guy in front of me, because it was a long table, and a guy in front of me sitting down who was watching it as well, said, I had to turn my head to look at it. It was the television screen was up above the door. He said, that's what the Tories are trying to do to us now. And I said, Labour's not much better. You see, I was already on the fringes then. I said, Labour's not much better, and I mentioned In Place of Strife, which was a precursor to the Industrial Relations Act, which Barbara Castle had been promoting, the In Place of Strife. And he said, what are you fucking talking about, Paddy? Coming over here fucking blowing us up. And all of a sudden, I just felt like a black fly on a really white wall, and that everyone in the whole pub was against me. And it's an interesting experience to show you how you can be intimidated by just something one person says in certain circumstances and feel that the whole world is against you. And did I stand up for the right of Irish people for self-determination? No, I blubbered something about I'm over here working just the same as you, and then somebody else took him away. And the fellow next to him, in an English accent, said, you should have fucking smacked him, Paddy.
You were involved in the PD march from Belfast to Dublin in 1969. Could you tell me about this? I know it's coming back to Ireland now.
Yeah, was it actually 1969? I'm not sure exactly what year it was. I see that in 1969 the British troops went in, and maybe it was the same year but earlier. It was around Easter time. And you hear nothing about this march now. I mentioned it to somebody who was on it. I'm terrible with names.
Well, the only time I'd heard of it before was Alan McSimone told me about it.
Oh,
right. When it arrived in Dublin, he was part of sort of the people in O'Connell Street or somewhere who welcomed you. So.
It was quite impressive. I remember marching. But the thing is, we started off the slogan was civil rights north and south, and the anarchists in the squatting movement and elsewhere in London had organised a delegation to go, or a group to go. So that was my first time sailing to Belfast. I think I'd been to Belfast only one time before in a car. And we were put up for the first day, I think it was. I don't think we stayed there that night, but we might have done, in one of the university student buildings. And another guy who was quite famous at the time, anarchist there, he gave us a fry.
It wasn't MacGuffin, was it?
Yeah, no.
Oh, okay.
Was it MacGuffin? No, another one, I think.
Okay. I know there was more than one anarchist, but John MacGuffin was one of the anarchists.
It might have been him.
Common People's Democracy.
Yeah. So then the idea was we'd march through various areas, and in some places we'd be picked up and driven as well. And I remember one place, I forget where it was now. There were some splits within the organising group. Some of them didn't want it to go into the 26 counties. They wanted to keep it in the 6 counties, and others did. I think at the time the word was that Sir Tolman didn't want it to go into the 26 counties. What's your man from the People Before Profit in Derry?
Eamon McCann.
Eamon McCann was on the march. Bernard McAliskey was on the march, and her sister as well, who was down in Devlin, both of them. So in this place, all our luggage had been left behind, everything. We had no sleeping bags or nothing. I remember sleeping under a tricolour. At the time it wouldn't have been my favourite flag, but I didn't mind, I can tell you. It was freezing. Well, it was quite cold anyway. And I also remember in Lurgan, we got to Lurgan, and the town was already infested with RUC, but we hadn't seen the full Monty yet. A meeting was held in a local hall down there, and some people were suggesting we went and sat at the crossroads in protest, and I was against it because I just thought we'd get smashed. But I said to the people, I said, look, we've come over from England to support yous. The decision is yours. This is where you live. This is your town. So if you decide that that's what we're going to do, I don't want to do it, but I'll do it. And they decided that they would. So we marched out up the road, and there were rank and rank and rank and rank and rank of those big white jeeps that they had. And we got to the crossroads, and then we rushed into the middle and sat down, and they were into us straight away. I remember an RUC guy tore the glasses off my face and threw them on the ground and tried to stamp on them, and somebody else rescued them. Then we made a run, and all of a sudden there must have been all Catholic houses on that street, on one side of the street. They opened up their doors and people just went in, and then they slammed them against the cops. I remember inside thinking, okay, here I am, a real raving anarchist, and there's a picture of Kennedy on the wall and the Pope. But their instinct was just absolutely right. And a little bit later, while they were giving us soda bread and stuff to eat, which was great, I heard singing outside, and there was a group of teenage girls coming down the street in the face of the cops. Just unbelievable. And they were singing. So we came out, and the police stepped in front of them, and they just said pigs, and just went through them. And it was safe for us to come out then. It's just amazing. So when we got to Dublin, the plan was to hit Dublin for the Easter parade, the big commemoration the state used to have then, and be part of it and be visible. And there were some people who didn't want that to happen, and we got out too late. But we came into town, and I remember marching around with the rest. Maybe we were heading for UCD, which at the time had a big building in
Grosvenor Terrace.
Yeah. So we were marching through there, and there were huge crowds on the pavements. And I passed by my two brothers standing there in the crowd. I think they were already in, that would have been my two, which brothers would it? Not sure now. But they would have been probably in Sinn Féin at the time, which had just started, or certainly they would have been in Dunleary Action Committee, which was a big thing here then. Yeah.